Good afternoon. Welcome and thank you for joining us on today's ADL conference call. Jonathan, we're ready for you.
Thank you, Sasha, and welcome to all those on the line. This is Jonathan Greenblatt, CEO of ADL. Before we jump into our conversation today, I'd like to share a few thoughts. As you well know, the coronavirus has disrupted all of our daily lives. I hope that everyone on the line is well and settling into the new normal, which may find you working from home, your children distance learning, and all of us social distancing, if you will. I trust that wherever place you find yourself, you and your families continue to stay healthy and safe. Today is our first webinar in the new program we've created for our constituents and the broader community in this time of virtual experiences. And we call this initiative Fighting Hate from Home. It's a series of webinars, dialogues, and interactive conversations that we've created in response to the many requests we've received from people to keep our community united and informed in this moment of great uncertainty. We're grateful that you're joining us today to learn more and to talk about this very important and timely topic, how extremists are using the coronavirus to advance racist and conspiratorial agendas. This is a focus for us at ADL because of our timeless mission, which since 1913 has compelled us to, quote, stop the defamation of the Jewish people and secure justice and fair treatment to all. And we've seen, as COVID-19 continues to surge globally, a surge of anti-Semitic, xenophobic, and hateful messages proliferating online. Sometimes these are conspiracy theories. Sometimes these are outright misinformation. Sometimes it is just ugly vitriol and hate. But all of it's making it more difficult to access accurate information and elevating fear and anxiety. And while some of the messages may be new, and this moment is certainly unprecedented, actually much of this hate is repackaging old tropes for modern times. As this fast-spreading pandemic threatens to tax our public health systems, as it's taking a toll on the economy and upending nearly every aspect of all of our daily lives, we believe there's a very real risk that the compounding public anxiety around the virus could lead to the spread of another serious contagion, the scapegoating and blaming of Asian, Jewish, and other minorities for this public health crisis. In fact, the scapegoating has already started. We've seen politicians seeking to politicize the virus, deriding it as a, quote, Chinese virus, for example, or suggesting that foreigners are solely responsible for it, rather than using the terms developed by the WHO, by medical professionals, and people in the scientific community. We've seen Asian Americans and American Jews and other minorities blamed for the virus. And again, much of the anti-Semitism harkens back to long-standing myths about the Jewish people. We've seen some pundits actually pointing the finger at prominent Jews or the state of Israel as if the virus were the product of some conspiracy. Some of these people are political figures. There have been Hollywood celebrities and others engaging in this kind of really ugly and intemperate behavior. And we've seen the spread of internet chatter from white supremacists who are trying to suggest this disease is spreading in America thanks to an influx of foreigners, or even suggesting that white supremacists and extremists actually weaponize coronavirus to harm marginalized communities. While fortunately, none of this has entered the mainstream in a very significant way just yet, there's now a serious risk that this hateful rhetoric, these stereotypes, could actually, like the virus itself, jump from one population into another and take on a life of its own. Indeed, rarely has there been a more opportune moment to seize on fear and to spread the seeds of hate. At ADL, we've spoken out loudly and forcefully against this kind of fear-mongering, and we will continue to do so. We believe that elected officials, again, should heed the advice of medical professionals, the experts of the CDC and the World Health Organization, who have provided guidance saying that the virus should be referred to as COVID-19 or novel coronavirus. And those who are referring to this as the Chinese flu or the Wuhan virus or Kung flu, not only are they going against the advice of medical professionals, they're going against the advice of the informed experts. They are literally dividing and using divisive terms at a time when we've probably never needed unity quite so badly. Because we know at times of crisis, the voices of reason and logic can be drowned out by those who spread hatred or sow discord. So this kind of rhetoric, this kind of division needs to stop now. At ADL, we work every single day to try to build the kind of world we want to live in, one free from anti-Semitism, one devoid of extremism, one without bias and bigotry. For over a century, we've been, if you will, battling anti-Semitism and fighting hate for good. And I'm proud to say that ADL's Center on Extremism has been literally on the front lines of that effort. ADL's Center on Extremism are the foremost experts in the world on these issues of extremism, hate, and terror, both domestic and foreign. The center actively provides resources, expertise, and training that enables law enforcement officers, policymakers, community leaders, as well as internet and technology companies to identify and counter emerging threats. And at this time, these outstanding and dedicated professionals are working around the clock to provide people in positions of authority with the information that they need so that our leaders indeed can lead. Oren Siegel heads up ADL's Center on Extremism. He joined our organization more than 20 years ago and has spent the better part of the last 2 decades evaluating the activity and tactics of extremist groups and the different movements across the ideological spectrum who threaten the Jewish community and other marginalized groups. He has trained countless law enforcement officers, published reports and articles on a wide range of topics relating to extremism and hate. In 2006, Oren was recognized by the FBI for his exceptional service in the public interest. And just last year, he was named to the Forward's list of the 50 most influential, intriguing, and inspiring American Jews. It's a privilege to work with Oren, and it's my pleasure to introduce him today and to turn the presentation over to him. Oren?
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Really appreciate the introduction and the really important words. I'm going to share my screen now so that everyone can see some of the specifics that we're talking about. I'm going to actually stop sharing my own face, but we'll get started as soon as I share it. Here we go. So I understand that, everybody is dealing with this global pandemic day to day and hour to hour. And I just want to say that, ADL and the Center on Extremism team that I speak to every day since this began, remain committed to trying to find ways to make meaningful contributions during this time. As Jonathan's excellent remarks articulated, we have found ourselves in a place where anxiety and fear is at an all-time high. And the uncertainty that these days have brought us, enable in some ways disinformation, hatred to flourish. And that's why in the Center on Extremism and at ADL more broadly, we continue to track the hate that we have been tracking because it's more important than ever. We believe that speaking out now, when every hour and every day has so much uncertainty, is so important. And I think I also want to say, for those who spread this hatred and extremism, they need to know that we continue to be open for business as well. And so what I hope to provide is an overview, a sampling, if you will, of what we're seeing online, the impacts, and why we think it's so important to continue to speak out, do the work that we're doing in tracking, and frankly, provide alternatives for people, and so that they know how to respond to hate during these very delicate times. So, not surprisingly, when there is a global event, you will have people who try to leverage it, to exploit it, in order to put forth their ideas, including those whose ideas are based on hate. And indeed, one of the oldest stereotypes about the Jewish people is that they have power to manipulate these global events to their benefit. Indeed, one of the strains of this conspiracy theory can actually be traced back to the bubonic plague. You know, the idea that Jews were purposely inflicting diseases on non-Jews. And here are some examples. And again, these are just a sampling to give you a sense of what is spreading online, of the types of tropes that are playing out, again, modern day myths and tropes that are built on anti-Semitism. On the left is a Trojan horse that is employed by a Jewish caricature, this sort of caricature that is one among the most popular online memes, if you will, of this called the Happy Merchant, of this sort of conniving, planning Jewish caricature. Looks like images out of Die Stürmer from, Germany in the 1930s and 40s. And in this theme, it's that the Jews have created the coronavirus in order to try to gain power, right, at the expense of others. And on the right, you have something that takes it even a step further, that the coronavirus is literally being depicted as Jewish, simultaneously implying that Jews are spreading the virus and that the Jews are the virus themselves. So this notion of power, right, this trope and this myth, which I should note is outlined in ADL's Anti-Semitism Uncovered, our guide to myths and tropes that we just put out last week. It has other elements that we are seeing play out. Whenever people talk about this idea that Jews have power to manipulate global events, two names tend to come up. One is the Rothschilds, kind of historically a conspiracy theory about this family that has manipulated world events. And more recently, it's George Soros. And so you see on the left is a tweet from former Sheriff David Clark, in which he says, clearly without any evidence, that George Soros is somehow involved in the spread of this virus. That takes on the classic anti-Semitic tropes that we've seen about the Rothschilds. And just so people don't forget, those tropes and those memes are being created as well. On the right is a cartoon where an apparent member of the Rothschilds, right, depicted as, weighing more than the people, highlighting his power. The smoke in his cigar is dollars and euros, indicating that money is the focus of this moment in time for the Jews. Greed, another classic stereotype, that the Jews are scheming and greedy and manipulative, so that they are presented as exploiting moments in time. Today, exploiting the coronavirus pandemic for profit. On the left, again, you see this Happy Merchant meme wearing a hazmat suit. And it's sort of implied that not only in the message that accompanies it, that not only did this Jewish character manufacture the virus, but actually has the vaccine and is willing to exploit people's fears, controlling the availability of a vaccine in order to profit at the expense of non-Jews. A classic anti-Semitic trope in a modern day dissemination. And on the right is a stereotypical Asian character coughing on a cartoon of Uncle Sam, who then hands a check over to a Jewish caricature for $1.5 trillion, highlighting again the idea that Jews are trying to profit somehow off of this virus. Now, the fact is that many of these tropes and memes that we're seeing are playing out on, fringe platforms, are in echo chambers where extremists are talking to themselves. But it's not that difficult to find the language on some of the more established social media platforms. These platforms that I suspect more of us are spending our time on as we are socially isolating, trying to stay at home, trying to listen to the doctor's orders, to government orders, to distance ourselves. Presumably more people will be spending their time throughout the day, which makes these messages, even if you see that they have not been shared in this example, much more available to a broader audience. And these, again, are just easy to find when you search Jews or vaccine, to find tweets that talk about Jewish control or trying to take advantage of the stock market or selling a vaccine for profit. But it gets worse in some ways. There's a lot of discussion about, this being an opportunity to kill Jews. And again, this is just a sampling, and some of the worst examples we are not going to share publicly per se. But you have people cheering on the coronavirus, for example, in this, on the left, in this example, where there's an article talking about 3 Israelis who are hospitalized with flu-like symptoms, and on the bottom it says, basically 6 million more to go. Or encouragement for people to spread this in Israel. The idea of encouraging the spread of the virus in Jewish communities, again, is sort of an extension of this. Some anti-Semites are encouraging more active spread in these communities. On the left, this person published a list that goes that if you have various symptoms, what you should do with it. But targeting Jews is most notably something that you ought to do, whether in Jerusalem or in Jewish places. And on the right is a still image from a clip where the figure is dancing. And when you combine that with the message above, it's clear that they want to do as much harm to Jews and where Jewish entities and institutions are, including supermarkets. Now, one of the tried and true tropes in anti-Semitism is the denial of the Holocaust. And Holocaust denial is somehow finding a way into the messages of this hate online as well. They're trying to capitalize on the confusion about modern methods of disposing bodies, for example, in China, to cast doubt on the amount of Jews that were killed in the Holocaust, or even that it happened at all. But here's something critical. We're not just tracking fringe platforms for anti-Semitism. We're not just tracking the conspiracies around this virus on established platforms. We're tracking and seeing so much hate beyond anti-Semitism. And this speaks fundamentally to the mission of the ADL, right? You fight one form of bigotry by fighting all forms of bigotry. Stop the defamation of the Jewish people, secure justice for all. And that's why we are collecting examples as well about the Sinophobia, the anti-Asian hatred, and other forms of xenophobia that we're seeing. And to give some examples here, people have been given the coronavirus a whole range of different nicknames. Jonathan had mentioned some, like the Kung Flu, the China virus, the Wuhan virus. We're seeing this spread on various social media networks. We're also hearing this echoed in our public discussion. And our public discussion, when it resorts to language like this, legitimizes those extreme and fringe spaces, enhances their ability to reach their audience and have an impact. So these nicknames that link the virus with China, in many ways stigmatizes the Chinese people themselves. And there's no shortage of the types of examples that we can see, memes all over social media mocking Chinese people, blaming them for dietary habits. This one of the oldest conspiracies with the virus is the idea that it was first transmitted to humans by somebody eating bat soup, which is completely false. But again, underscores a sort of idea that takes on momentum when it is spread repeatedly online. And again, when it is supported by the statements of public officials. Insulting and exaggerating these habits ultimately do have a real world impact. The fear that is created of Chinese people, the way that we see the fear or the distrust that is created against the Jewish community is not something to be underestimated. Again, especially in a time where fear and anxiety is so high, where people are trying to make sense of what is the new normal. And so in these examples, if you believe that Chinese people caused the virus or are responsible somehow for spreading it, then it's not illogical leap for you to then suggest that Chinese people should be avoided altogether. Even the ones that have nothing to do with any of this. And here are some of the memes from Instagram and Reddit, images suggesting that Chinese people should be feared because of their ethnicity, not to touch them, eat at their establishments, share a drink, and panic if somebody coughs. Again, it can get worse, where you literally start seeing people panicking or trying to exploit some of the panic and concerns by saying, when you see a Chinese person, or a boy in this case, cough, you must kill the virus. These extend beyond Jews, Asians. I mean, there are others who take this as an opportunity to express their form of hatred against immigration. And I know, by the way, that this is not necessarily the most pleasant viewing at this time. I'm not necessarily a motivational speaker right at this moment. But I have to say, it's important for people to understand what is out there before we can start crafting solutions to respond. And so on the left, you'll see a tweet that links past major illnesses to plagues, the world with plagues around the world, implying that diseases are foreign in nature, and therefore the US should screen in order those who get into this country. Now, by the way, some sort of element of screening those who are sick, that doesn't necessarily mean you're extreme. But when you talk about diversity actually equals bringing in a virus or sickness, that's where extremists put their twist on these narratives. We've seen this with homophobia as well. People basically saying that this is a result of the regulating the LGBTQ community, and this is a response to that. Now, these forms of hate are not necessarily the only thing driving conspiracies. Conspiracy theories rely on disinformation. Notions that somehow the coronavirus was manufactured. Some say perhaps in the 80s, the truth is, while there's a patent for certain coronaviruses, it's different than the one we're seeing now, where there is no patent. But the point is this: our battle against disinformation, our battle against conspiracy theories is really important because it is the life's blood of conspiracy theories more broadly. And the more that we normalize disinformation in this environment, the more we enable hate more broadly to flourish. I'm going to conclude by saying, some are trying to weaponize the coronavirus on some of the platforms that we're seeing, especially amongst the extremists, where literally go cough on your local minority has become a meme. But beyond that, there are those who we define as accelerationists, those most extreme militant, say on the white supremacist side, who believe that now is the time to start a race war or a civil war, which Boogaloo has become a phrase to refer to. And they believe that this time of uncertainty and anxiety may be the time for them to strike. They've been saying this before the coronavirus. They will continue to say it as we continue to thrive through this moment. Again, we cannot take the stance where we can't take this seriously. Here are just, again, an example of the type of messages they're trying to get across to create fear and anxiety, that they are stockpiling and they're ready to go. Now, I'm going to conclude by saying this. These are random sampling of examples of what we're seeing online. They speak to some of the broader tropes and hatred that we're observing. But the concern is not simply the fact that this is normalized and mainstreamed on online platforms. The fact that we're concerned about is that how is this going to play out on the ground? And already there is some examples that suggest that it is playing out on the ground. I mean, again, we spend as much time on our phones as we do in the real world, sometimes together at the same time. So when at GW, when students there feel like they're being targeted both online with anti-Semitic tropes and even in person because they attended an APAC event in which somebody tested positive for the coronavirus. Again, that's one way it plays out on the ground. We're seeing more and more reports from people, not only on social media, but news reports about hate crimes against the Asian community, the Chinese community in particular, and even comments made against the Jewish community. People are believing, in some cases, what they are reading online. Here's an extremist organization called the American Identity Movement that literally stop the spread of this virus by stopping immigration. Here you'll see an example of a flyer with Corona, the alcohol, the beer, with immigration kills. So it's not far-fetched to be concerned about what the impact of these online tropes will have in the real world. And that is why we believe it is so critical to shed some light on what we are seeing. The more we can demonstrate where the narratives are heading, the more hopefully we can be able to help others become part of the process to push back against hate. So I'm going to stop there, and I believe we're going to take some questions. Thank you for the time.
Thank you, Warren. And my name is Amy Blumpkin. I'm the Vice President of Brand and Marketing here at ADL. I'm now going to take some of the questions that have been coming in the chat. As a reminder, if you are joining us today from a computer, at the bottom of the screen, there is a chat option for you to go ahead and ask your questions for Jonathan, Warren, or for both of them. Alternatively, you can email your questions to sbloch, B-L-O-C-H, @adl.org. We've allowed about 15 minutes for questions. We'll probably run a little bit over, given to the number of questions that we have, so I encourage you all to stay on with us as long as you can. And please note that this presentation will be made available on the ADL YouTube channel within the next couple of hours after this presentation. So, Oren, let me start with the first question that we've got coming in. As we are seeing all of this hate and extremism online against Jews, Israel, and others, what can we do to help combat propaganda? Oren, you're on mute.
Thank you, Amy. I think it's a great question. I think that depending on what platform you're seeing this on, there are opportunities to flag it. Many of these companies still rely on users to alert them to the type of hatred and bigotry and commentary that may actually violate their terms of services. So one thing to do is you can at least flag that. Now, we understand that many platforms, that flagging mechanism is not as useful, or they don't necessarily even want to suggest that they will address these issues depending on that platform. So I think what is important is for people to feel like they have somewhere else to go. You can report to ADL. We take these incidents very seriously, no matter what platform that it is. And the other element that people can do is, to the degree that you hear people starting to mimic or echo the narratives that you're seeing in these fringe platforms, this is an opportunity to call them out, to provide maybe the context that we are providing in our public resources, to tell them, here's what you need to understand about what you might be saying. That sometimes people are engaging in the bigotry that they're seeing online without necessarily where it comes from. That's where our Anti-Semitism Uncovered guide really will come in helpful.
Warren. Another question that has come in: as security professionals in global and US companies, what can we do to help protect our employees and our executives from such threats?
Well, this is Jonathan. I guess I would start by simply saying, I think if you're a security professional or in management, any kind of organization, right now in this moment, we all need to be taking very seriously the directives from public health professionals, Dr. Fauci at the CDC, elected officials at the federal, state, and local level, about the need to engage in this strategy of social distancing to keep our people healthy and our community safe. So I think first and foremost, everyone should be exploring how you can make sure that your people have remote access or working from home. I know at ADL, we implemented a work from home model last week, closed all 25 of our offices across the country and those overseas as well. We've canceled all events. We've postponed all missions. We've pulled down all trainings. So anything essentially on-site and in person to the end of the second quarter, just off at the time being. I think that's the number one thing that all of us have almost an obligation to do so that we can do our part to flatten the curve.
Thank you, Jonathan. Another question that has come in. On many uncensored Facebook community groups, and there's a number of questions in this vein, we're seeing people show articles and images of Orthodox and Hasidic Jews having gatherings during this time, therefore insinuating the Jews are helping spread the virus, endangering people, and don't obey our laws. It's creating chain conversations full of bigotry and anti-Semitism. What do you recommend on ways of addressing this?
Why don't I take that for starters and then throw it over to Oren if he wants to add? So I think it's certainly true that in many faith communities that engage in kind of rituals and whatnot, you'll see people coming together, whether it's Jews for minions to pray, whether it's Muslims to go to a mosque for services on Friday, whether it's Catholics going to Mass in a church on Sunday. There are many, many examples of this. We would say that while there may be cases where there are Jewish communities who are experiencing the virus, it's being experienced all over the country. And there's no particular group that's more statistically likely to catch the virus, if you will. And I know of many Jewish organizations and many communities that are actually engaging in very active efforts of social distancing. So when you see something online, when you see people implying that, again, the Jewish community somehow is overrepresented in the cases, or that Jewish ritual is somehow uniquely contributing to the spread of the virus, we would advise you to interrupt intolerance when it happens. Speak out on whether it's on social media, on that Facebook feed, on your friend's wall, on other places. And if you see an image or a meme or language that you think is anti-Semitic, flag it. All of us can do that today. ADL, through our Center for Technology and Society, which is located in Silicon Valley, actively collaborates and works with Facebook and Google and Twitter and platforms like YouTube and Instagram and Reddit and a number of others. But each of us as consumers and users have the ability to engage and to push back on prejudice when we see it. And all of us should actively do that, in my opinion.
If I just can add one thing, that I think to make a distinction between what you're seeing sometimes, you have to ask, is somebody focusing specifically on Orthodox Jewish gatherings versus, say, others who are gathering, for example, on beaches in Florida? And if somebody's really only focusing on one, you may be able to tell sort of where they're coming from. And second, one of the reasons it's important for us to collect this, and one of the reasons why even flagging to ADL if you're not necessarily getting the response that you want, is that we are able to provide these examples publicly and even privately sometimes, so that people can learn how to identify them in the first place. One of the things that's really key is having a library, if you will, of hate, which ADL has one of the greatest. And that can help the companies who want to actually identify and kick it off. So I would just only add that.
Thank you, Oren. I'm going to switch gears here for a minute. One of the questions that we've got asks about, what is ADL doing to partner and support our local communities at this time? Jonathan, that might go to you.
Local communities in general?
Local communities in general, but I think that there might be an opportunity to talk about how we're working with others.
Sure. So we are actively engaged in dialogue with different advocacy organizations, particularly those that represent other marginalized communities. Particularly, I would point out the work we have with Asian Americans Advancing Justice and other groups engaged very specifically in supporting, people of East Asian descent or Chinese Americans who've experienced the brunt of the kind of virus-inspired xenophobia in recent weeks. In addition, we're working through and engaged with other civil rights organizations because, again, while a lot of this invective in recent weeks has been directed at Asian Americans and American Jews, make no mistake, these calls to close the borders oftentimes are, directed at Latinos or people who are perceived to be, of Hispanic descent. So that's also equally problematic. So on the one hand, we're very engaged with the groups who support, again, the kind of subpopulations that are directly being attacked by bigots in this moment. I'd say secondly, we're working, we have 25 offices across the United States, and we are actively engaged with local elected officials, policymakers, community organizations like Jewish federations in those places where we operate. Last point I'll make is we have been, in addition to that work, both actively dialoguing and back channeling with elected officials. We've been trying as best we can to reach out to certain folks in Washington, D.C. I know I've been in touch with members of Congress and been engaged in trying to outreach to the administration, pushing them on these issues. We've also been talking again to elected officials at the state and local level.
Thank you, Jonathan. Another question that we have which sort of builds on that, which talks about, is there a library of responses regarding the coronavirus and tropes for various situations at the ADL, and how do we access them? You're on mute, Jonathan.
Sorry about that. Glad that question was asked. Just last week, one of the things to point out, and Oren alluded to this, is many specifically the anti-Semitic invective we've seen around coronavirus, that the Jews are somehow profiteering off of this, that Jews or that Jewish people or the state of Israel designed this, that there's a conspiracy led by George Soros fomenting this. While these are new claims, in fact, they are kind of regurgitations of very old anti-Semitic tropes, whether it's about Jews and money or the blood libel or whatnot. And as it happens, just last week, the ADL rolled out a new resource called Anti-Semitism Uncovered. You can find it at antisemitism.adl.org. It's a new resource we created that walks through the 7 most prominent anti-Semitic myths. And we did that because we've seen them increasingly mainstreamed in recent years by elected officials and kind of public figures. It provides a history of this anti-Semitic trope, as well as contemporary examples of it. I'm very proud of this work. It was written by someone with a PhD and a scholarship in anti-Semitism. It was peer-reviewed by some of the leading academics in the field. And it's written in a very modular, simple format that I think any layman can find useful. Again, you can find that at antisemitism.adl.org.
Thank you, Jonathan. And we'll also include that link when we send out notes from this.
Great.
Another question that we have, Jonathan, this is directed to you, is a question about financial support. How can organizations like ADL, dealing with the likelihood that charitable giving could be affected by the coronavirus, or how are organizations like ADL dealing with the likelihood that charitable giving could be affected by the coronavirus and an economic shutdown?
Well, listen, I think that's a very good and relevant question, and one we've obviously been thinking about over the past few weeks here at ADL as this crisis has indeed intensified. Look, we're dependent on philanthropy at ADL to fund the important work that we do and fully expect there to be some pressure on revenue. We're doing our part to flatten the curve, as I said, because I believe that ensuring the health and safety of our people at ADL, whether it's my full-time staff or my part-time staff or our volunteers and supporters, they and their families, that's our number one concern. So as I mentioned, we've taken a number of operational steps, closed our offices, suspended travel, canceled events, pulled back on missions, postponed all trainings, anything in person. But as you've seen from today's presentation, we need to continue our work. The hate is actually rising, not receding. And I know it's vital to keep the communities we serve safe. It's crucial to be working in partnership, hand in hand with other marginalized communities that are also experiencing bigotry and racism. So while during this time, we're absolutely not actively soliciting donors, I mean, I think a lot of people are worried with good reason about many other things at this moment. I would, be remiss if I didn't remind folks, including all of you on this webinar, that we still need your help. There's a donate button on adl.org that you can check out. And even in these harrowing times, in fact, maybe especially in these harrowing times, we'd very much value your support. So thank you for the question.
Thank you, Jonathan. Couple of other questions. Is the BDS movement leveraging the virus to promote anti-Semitism?
Well, here's what I would say about that. I have not seen any direct examples of that per se, but we have certainly seen a fair amount of anti-Israel invective utilized by people who around the virus. So the Iranian government claimed this was a Zionist plot some time ago. We've seen a bunch of really nasty memes and photoshopped images and rhetoric online, sort of applauding that this was happening in Israel. The Middle East director of Human Rights Watch actually had a super ugly, nasty tweet about Israel and its relationship to this and the virus, where it's being experienced there in Israel. So it's pretty ugly. And we certainly know that the architects of the BDS movement, those who don't believe in the legitimacy of the state of Israel, I mean, to deny Jewish people the right to self-determination, we believe is deeply anti-Semitic when you would accord that to everyone else. That being said, I think in this moment, we really need to come together. And those voices who are employing anti-Semitism in the BDS movement or otherwise, they are on the fringes of our society. I think the good news is that people of goodwill realize there are victims all over. And I've seen some very interesting stories about people from countries that don't have diplomatic relations with Israel, sending positive message to people in the state of Israel suffering from the virus. So let's hope that at the other end of this, we can find ways to bring people together more than we can keep people apart.
Thank you. A question about, are there examples of Islamists or Iranian regime blaming Jews or Israel for COVID-19? And what percentage may you say is coming from Islamist circles, and how should we stand up to that?
I could just jump in quickly and say, I think Jonathan just mentioned this. We've seen the Iranian regime actually blame America and Israel for this. And so, the anti-Semitism especially is not uniquely part of any one movement or ideology, right? Whether you're far left or far right, Islamist, people use anti-Semitism and exploit anti-Semitic narratives in order to fit their worldview. So this form of hatred is not coming from any one place. And indeed, much of it that we're seeing spread online is not even coming necessarily from some specific ideology, but from the ability to express hate, period. And so I can't give you the measure of how much of it is this and how much of it is that. We don't know. We can just tell you the volume is significant enough that it raises concern from all sides. And we're concerned about what is going to happen on the ground, which is why we're trying to collect information about that as well and support and be allies to those communities when they are victimized.
Thank you, Oren. We've got a number of questions about what can I do in addition to supporting ADL? What can people do to fight anti-Semitism? What can they do to help support other marginalized communities? Would love to hear from both of you about some specific steps you would like this audience to be taking.
So I'll start. Number one, I think it's important for people to speak up when they see hate happen. So you can get educated about it. Antisemitism.adl.org is a great resource. Oren's blog about the coronavirus that we just published yesterday, you can find it on adl.org, is a great resource. But speak up and interrupt intolerance, whether it's at the literal water cooler or the virtual water cooler. That is really important. So I think people should interrupt hate when it happens. Again, flag a comment on Facebook, and if you don't know how to do it, just Google it. It's pretty easy. Call out a tweet if you see one, or again, say something to someone, whether it's a family member or a friend or a colleague. again, I think we can't look away or stand idly by when we see hate. So number one, speak up. Number two, share facts. You know, avoid hysteria. Like, you don't have to engage in vitriol. The facts are on the side of, again, I think, people of good faith. So I would encourage people to be measured and sober and just straightforward and call us out when it happens. And number three, share strength. Be an ally for someone and an upstander and an ally for someone when you see someone else being targeted by hate. Find ways to reach across the proverbial aisle to someone who might be of a different political persuasion, or a different ethnic group, or a different faith community, and be there for them. I think sharing strength is a very vital thing that you can do. And so how do you do that? You could, again, put out a comment online when we come out of this, you know, the social distancing. You could volunteer, get engaged. But look, you can also do advocacy online. Sign a petition, right? Again, do something online of support for someone in need. And just keep in mind, there is really no them in this moment. There is only us. And we are ultimately all in this together.
I would just add, Amy and Jonathan, that my experience has been that neighborhoods are finding ways to support each other, even though we need to keep at least 6 feet away from each other. And I'm finding that there are opportunities that are being created through innovation to make use of this time that people didn't think they would have. So whether it's people communicating on Zoom calls with each other as friends or neighbors, or whether it's trying to find opportunities for education. One thing we might have more time is on our hands now is at home. And so ADL has opportunities to help educate people right now. The fear and anxiety is going to be there. People want to support each other about where you're going to get some food. Where might you be able to, you know, support your local business. But there are other conversations that can be had now when people are, frankly, focused on trying to educate their kids and maybe make some opportunity to engage with each other. And I think ADL can serve in that space, whether it's through our educational programs, whether it's through understanding how to address extremism, how to identify it. There's a lot we have online, and I know from Jonathan's leadership that there's going to be a lot more that's created to help those conversations happen when people need to have those conversations most.
Thank you, Warren. Thank you, Jonathan. We've gone through a lot. There are a number of questions yet left online. We'll do our best to make sure that in upcoming blogs, we will respond to them. I want to respect everyone's time today. And so let you know also that the session has been recorded and, as I said, available on the ADL YouTube channel to watch again or to share with friends that have not had a chance to watch it. Again, Warren and Jonathan have provided some excellent insights into the hate-related challenges this pandemic has brought about. And thanks to everyone who's on the line who joined us today. This is the first in our series of Fighting Hate from Home. We'll be continuing to provide these webinars on a weekly basis with a variety of topics. Our team will communicate with you in the next couple of days. Please stand by to join us again next Thursday at 2:30 for another topic. Thank you so much, and I wish everyone to stay safe.